When you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So yeah, my name is Tom Lawrence. I'm head of school for Woolwich Polytechnic for boys, and what I'm about to show you is an extract of something I went through in January with all the staff. And the purpose of it there was to explain who I am, where I come from, my influences, my triggers, my insecurities as well, to get people to reflect on their own sort of influences, to help them to empathise with students, particularly as we've gone back into full-time schooling after 2 highly disruptive years, and that disruption has continued. So to help everyone empathise with each other, but also for students on their return, to have even better relationships than we even currently have now. So that was the intention behind it, and I'm going to give you a little extract of it, and then come to some reasoning, hopefully by the end of that, to help with that. So I started off with who I am and where I come from. And quite literally, I started with the house that I was brought up in Worcester, many, many years ago here. People make assumptions about me based upon my accent, that I must have been brought up in a castle or something, but actually no, it was a very, very poor family, very working class, with lots of stresses and tensions that happen when there's poverty, and the poverty was quite intense when I was growing up, to a point that I was a bit of a fantasist. And I remember looking up from the back garden of that house, seeing the contrails of aeroplanes going overhead, and literally just dreaming of that sort of escape, that freedom, that luxury of taking a flight. And genuinely, when I was a kid, I never thought it would be a possibility. It was something I thought was just for other people. And things, everyday things like orange squash, which we never had. It was water or milk, I remember. And then at Christmas, cider, just once a year. And my friends who lived on the estate from richer families always had these, what I considered luxuries, and never had them as a kid. And the other thing is, and I didn't realise this until sadly when my mum died, and I found my I found my school reports when I was going through her belongings, is that I thought I was a pretty well-behaved kid at school. And I remember reading through my reports then, many, many years later, and being able to read between the lines of those school reports, and found out that something I pretty much knew, which was that I wasn't the greatest of students at school, far from it. I never used to do my homework. I used to truant. And actually, the off licence there represents the fact from the age of 13 I could get served alcohol. And so I did. Used to go there, get cheap vodka and get drunk. And even go back to school after lunch drunk. So I was far from a model student. And I think that's really important because I'm okay now at the age of 47. It's taken me quite a few years to get to the stage of being okay, I think. But I wasn't completely okay as a kid. And many of the kids that we have here are much better than I was when I was at school. But are not all okay themselves, and recognizing that and recognizing my own past, I think helps me with that sort of empathy, to make sure that I've got the right form of communication with them, and something I've tried to, through this presentation, encourage our teachers to feel as well. And consequently, although I did all right in my GCSEs, I was a bit of a feckless child, didn't really have a sense of direction, and I went to art college, realised I was rubbish at art after a few weeks and left, and worked full-time at McDonald's for 2 years, and then 2 years part-time whilst I was doing my A-levels, and I'd love to say I really learned then during my A-levels to be a better student, but again, I didn't. I made similar sort of mistakes as I made when I was at school, and even at university I made those mistakes as well. So I'm very much aware that my own background is quite checkered. It's full of peaks and troughs, and probably the troughs outnumbering the peaks. I could put all of this down to my childhood and the sort of precariousness of it. And as I said, it was quite a stressful time. There was domestic violence in my house. It was pretty unpleasant a lot of the time. But it wasn't until my father died quite some time ago now that I sort of realised that, you know, they tried their best in very challenging circumstances, essentially down to poverty. And I think at this moment in time, with inflation as it is, that the precariousness of the society in which we teach is really prevalent. So I wanted staff to have an understanding as to where I was coming from, my own background, and to be quite honest and open and upfront about it so that they could think about themselves. And I did get back afterwards some very nice feedback, not like I asked for it, it was unsolicited, but came to me that people were really thankful and grateful for sharing this, quite frankly, with them. So from that, I led on to this, which I shared with the staff as well, is that I'm aware now of my privileges as a white, middle-aged, middle-class man, but I'm also aware of my own inhibitions and self-blocking due to my original class. That sort of, do I deserve this? Am I in the right place? And I think that comes down to, in part, that sort of working class background where my father, for instance, his greatest ambition for us was to work behind the counter in a bank. He had no aspiration higher than that. He couldn't see anything better than that. And I think that's still with me to a degree. That sort of holds me back in some ways, but also my sexuality as well. That fear of being judged or whatever, I think sort of holds me back. And I have no problem sharing you know, the things that I think I've improved in, but also where I think I need to improve. But I'm aware of my good fortune. And I think that the context, if you like, of my life has made it really apparent the reason why I'm in education is because I cannot stand that ingrained intergenerational poverty that I think is still prevalent in this country. I still think this country is class ridden. I still think there are ceilings, glass or otherwise, for many people, and I really, really resent that. And I'm in education in part in my own small way to try and change that, so that those kids that come through our doors and leave us have opportunities and a sense of self-confidence that perhaps I was lacking, hence the mistakes I made with my A-levels and beyond. I care about the passive and active discrimination that blocks people's progress, but I know that education is the most effective way out of it. And as I said, I still fear that our society is still stuck in that notion of self-help, that Victorian notion of self-help, that if you're poor, then somehow it's your fault. And I know that's not the case from my own background. I know that my parents' poverty wasn't down to them. It wasn't down to fecklessness or the lack of effort. And that is something that really genuinely bothers me and motivates me for all of our kids who predominantly come from quite poor backgrounds themselves to do exceptionally well. And that care for fairness keeps me in my job and keeps me sane. It's a real touchstone in everything that I do, the mistakes, but also hopefully some of the good things that I do in my job as well. And the question I pose to our staff for them to think about, and I will put it over to you to think about, is thinking about yourselves and your own backgrounds, what inhibits you, but also what drives you, what makes you care about certain things. And I think it's necessary to keep that in our minds to enable us, particularly when it's so tough, going back to the previous presentation, as we are apparently coming out of a pandemic, but still pretty much within it. What drives us, keeps us going on, And I think it's that sense of hope and that real sort of cleaving to what we care about most. And those are the things that I care about most that help motivate me through some of the most difficult times. So I'm thinking, how is this linked to caring authentically? And as I say here, I know where I'm from, and I feel no shame about that. It doesn't embarrass me, but nor does it make me proud. I feel pretty sanguine about it. It's okay. I don't look back on my past with any sense of resentment. I certainly felt it as a child, but I don't feel it now. It just makes me accept who I am now, and I wouldn't be who I am now without having had a past. It helps me communicate, to listen and to empathise. By sharing, this is me, my soul on a plate, if you like, it helps me to empathise with others and to listen to them. I think self-awareness is absolutely essential, and I'm painfully aware of my faults. Hopefully not too cripplingly at times. I'm aware of most of my triggers, sometimes not all, and I'm often delighted and surprised when somebody gives me feedback on some of my triggers, and it's like, my God, I've never seen that before, but you're absolutely right. But I'm also aware of my contributions to our immediate society, and hopefully more widely through the amazing influence that schools can have on society. But I'm also aware of what I care about most, and education countering social injustice. And I hope that by being open and honest about myself, this encourages staff to feel the same, to know that where they're coming from, to be able to communicate, listen and empathise, to be able to become self-aware themselves, to know their faults, their triggers and their contributions, and know what they care about most. So essentially, the summary of that slide is, I want people to understand where I'm coming from in what I want for the school in terms of moving it forward, making improvements. But I also want to understand where they're coming from to be able to help them to overcome any problems that they have. And it brings me to, without trying to sound too pretentious, the famous romantic philosopher Immanuel Kant, who posited the view that human beings are not ends in themselves, are ends in themselves, but not a means to something else. And this is about the sort of common humanity, really, that we treat each other in very humane ways. My concern is at times, unfortunately, I think it's a rapidly out of date premise about leadership and management and that sort of thing, is that in recent years it seems to have been fashionable to have been a sort of apprentice style contestant who's hard-nosed, who's hard-headed and seemingly emotionally sterile and would do anything, trample over anyone to get where they want to be. And that's simply not me, and I'm not really into anyone who's like that. I think authenticity for me is really about embracing where you come from, who you are, and embracing others similarly for where they come from and who they are now, and respecting the common humanity amongst us all, going back to what Immanuel Kant said. And those are my thoughts on the topic of caring authentically. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Tom.